Well, hello, Steve. How are you?
Hey, good, Mark. How you doing?
Good, good, good. Back live on air. Hopefully, we've got over a few of the furballs of last time. Maybe it's a bit clearer this time. But looking forward to it.
Yeah, adjusting my camera here just a little bit, figure out where I'm at.
Get yourself in screen a bit clearer.
Yeah, that looks better.
Excellent, excellent. What's been happening in your world this last week?
So this past week, we've been experimenting with the new Power Portals
Okay.
uh, that were announced
Mm-hmm.
at Business Application Summit. Um, just playing around with what that technology looks like. You know, they opened it up for CDS only environments.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Similarly, they announced but had already previously kind of released the Outlook app for CDS environments. So we're getting some more things. We've already played around with the Outlook app. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's essentially the same app we had before. It's just not hard coded to the out of the box stuff. It's a little more generic, and you can go add those pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that it's probably going to become the Outlook app. And if you've got first party, you just decide what you want to display and what you don't,
Yep.
making that a little simpler. And the probably same with the portals. I think the CDS portal will end up being the portal, and then you can, if you check that box to add on some first party features that it'll just recognize those things.
Mm-hmm. So, at the start of the year, in fact, I think I was talking to you around MVP Summit time, and I was saying, there were three key things that I thought the Power Platform needed to be addressed, so that people could truly use it independently of Dynamics. And those three things were: one, the Outlook connector needed to work directly with CDS. Tick. The second one was that the portals needed to be able to be built directly on CDS, right? So, common use case scenario, you don't want a Dynamics dependency. The third one was the need for the common data model for the first party apps to be made available directly onto CDS. So, somehow would need to basically drop that common data model in if we needed to use it. I was reading this week about the common data model, and the whole thing is that they are open source. They are, um, Microsoft are not like, well, they list it as open source. And so those things, although they're attached, if you like, to Dynamics first party apps, I assume, well, my understanding is that that's going to become available. And I think that's the last major thing that allows really anybody to build apps on the platform without kind of any worry of uh, limiting their product potential moving forward. So in other words, it's interoperable with first party apps if you build a standalone app.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think that, and I don't know where they're at in the process of releasing that. I think we said last week we touched on, Matt Barber had told me before that was the long term plan,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's still a little politics that are holding that back. But even without that, I think it kind of depends on the customer that you target, what you're doing with building an app on CDS. We the stuff that we built on CDS and have talked with Microsoft about, we've talked to some of the Microsoft people that this is like an on ramp, right? We're going to get people addicted to business applications with our simple to use apps, and of course they're immediately going to want to upgrade to the full power. And that's not a motion we're seeing actually happen. And as a matter of fact, we'd taken some steps to we had a couple of versions of our product. We had a version that was designed to go on top of the first party that assumed all those first party entities were there, and we utilized those. Or we had a CDS only version where we kind of built our own entities. And going forward, I'm really not seeing a huge need to use those first party entities for our particular market, because you get a customer stood up on a model driven application, or if they build their own model driven application, or anybody out there builds a model driven app, particularly if it's got any kind of a vertical focus. You work with that customer to extend, customize it. We've got the Outlook app now, which is great, a feature they would all want. Now we've got the ability to potentially push out a portal. I don't see a scenario where that customer ever comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to move to something else," um, any more than they would want to move from Salesforce to Dynamics or Dynamics to, I mean, they're already using something. It's solving their needs. Unless there's some huge gap of a need, and maybe it's going to be around AI, but I think AI is still early days. Um, I'm seeing this play out a little differently than I first had thought that it would.
Interesting, interesting. We just see in the chat there are a few people saying there's an echo, and I'm wondering if my mic is picking up yours as part of the issue. I might just turn you down a bit. One thing I'd love to hear back from everybody is what is Steve and my voice level about right? Last time we noticed it was a bit uneven. He was much louder than me, and I was much quieter. Is that better at the moment? Anyhow, keen to get your feedback on that. Steve, one of the things or bits of information that came up at Summit was around the size of the community. And I'll just pop it up there on screen. Can you see that there? The Growth in Dynamics 365
Yeah.
community is what's that? 1.85 million active community members? That's a big community.
Yeah. What is a community member? What does that mean?
Like, are they getting that information from all the Microsoft community areas as well as all the Dynamics community, as in, the Dynamics communities, perhaps? I know they're definitely including Power BI in this, based on what Philip said in his opening address.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a big number. I mean, regardless of how they're getting it, I'm sure they're tracking it, and the number's tracking up. There's no question about that.
Yeah, interesting, interesting.
I mean, it may be coming from the next metric there, those 555 user groups. It may be the active members of all those user groups. It's a lot of user groups.
Perhaps it does. Perhaps it's just the user groups then around the world that those numbers are coming from. So we don't know, but interesting. Dynamics 365 Saturdays there 61, so that means they're running an average of more than one a week now around the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've started to see some other a little more independent one-off events also running. I think TDG has done some things that are kind of independent. So there's some more things popping up around that idea of a Saturday or a one-day event.
Yeah.
That's just been surprising to me, the traffic that those generate. You just wouldn't have thought that a bunch of folks would go out on a Saturday, spend their Saturday, learning about stuff,
Yeah.
but they definitely do.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I see Microsoft really in the last 12 months or so, they're doing a much bigger push though on communities. Even James Phillips in his opening address at BizApp Summit I think his first sentence was around it being a community event.
Yeah, well, I think they definitely are seeing the return on their investment, and whatever that investment is, whether it's been dollars, attention, energy, they're seeing the return on that. Particularly with this whole citizen developer angle, I think that when it was pro developer around Dynamics, they pretty much had that audience captured. They knew who they were. But now, when you think about that citizen developer, they could be anybody, anywhere, and community's probably a good way to catch them. A good way to kind of find them and discover those citizens that have an interest. So it doesn't surprise me that they're doubling down on communities.
Yeah. Here's some other stats that came up on the day, which I thought was quite interesting to kind of show how big a deal the Power Platform is becoming. 4 billion flows are run each month now. That's a phenomenal number. 95% of Fortune 500 companies are using Power BI now. I mean, wow. Just incredible data here.
Yeah, Power BI in particular, man, what a rocket ship that thing was, coming out of nowhere. I remember playing with it when it first launched. I'm not a BI guy in particular anyway, but I remember playing with that tool a little bit and not being all that impressed. But then that thing just kept going and kept chugging and overtook Tableau, which was kind of the market leader.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think those guys are probably staying neck and neck. Tableau recently got bought by Salesforce, which is certainly validation. I think from
Mm-hmm.
Salesforce that Microsoft is doing some. I mean, it's interesting to now see Salesforce starting to copy things that are coming out of Microsoft.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, they did that with the guided process. Microsoft had
Mm-hmm.
come out
Mm-hmm.
with that
Mm-hmm.
and came out with something similar. Um, they still don't have an answer for flow, which is interesting of their own. But it is interesting to see them kind of turn around and follow Microsoft.
Yeah. Listen, I think that though, one of the things that James said really resonated is that because CDS is underpinning everything, right? Azure CDS is underpinning everything that Microsoft's doing now in the space. It's not a case of massively uninterconnected technologies or data sitting all over the place. It's actually really coming a cohesive story. And I just don't think the alternatives in market necessarily have even started a story that can really tell the better together. The one Microsoft is definitely becoming more and more, I think, part of their powerhouse.
Yeah, and we talked before about how Dynamics was always this kind of redheaded stepchild product down in a barn off campus, kind of disconnected from the rest of the organization. Never really talked about at events or anything like that. And they're out there competing with Salesforce and the big ERP houses as kind of this independent thing, not really taking advantage of the Microsoft whole, and that's I think what we've seen over the past couple of years is wait a minute, Dynamics is part of Microsoft, which has productivity, which has infrastructure, which has these big pieces, um, and this whole idea of going to market with that whole picture instead of just a piece and attacking Salesforce or SAP or one of those. I mean, now when you come at that deal with that whole picture, I mean, they really can't even compete with that picture. All they can do is try and isolate. I wrote a post a while back about Salesforce versus Microsoft. I don't know, the 800-pound gorilla or one of those posts, and several of the Salesforce you know fans that were kind of commenting on it were all trying to like carve out. Well, wait a minute, forget about all that. Let's just talk about Dynamics alone. They were trying to narrow the comparison,
Mm.
but you can't narrow the comparison because it isn't Dynamics alone. It's the whole. It's all of Microsoft. I'm sorry if you as Salesforce only have that one hammer to swing, but we got a whole set of cannons over here, and we're not going to park five of them just because you don't think the comparison is fair. You know?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing, like around this kind of integrated messaging and story and that type of thing, is I was listening to your podcast with Hayden Stafford, and he mentioned Pega being one of the big Showtime competitions that they're coming up against, and that's interesting because in Australia, that I was starting before I left, I was starting to compete more against Pega than anything else. They're in more deals, particularly in financial sector, utilities, any
Yeah.
government kind of organization, as where I was coming up against them, and they're a serious contender. Although they're don't come from here just CRM, they don't need to. They're a business application platform that has a massive workflow or workflow engine type that underpins the technology. So I think that might be our next run for our money type thing.
Yeah, they're kind of like this dark horse because I was not that familiar with Pega. I'd heard the name a few times. Frankly, had not run up against them at all here in the U.S. In our efforts, and I was caught a little off guard when he brought them up in that call, also as being someone that he's got his eye on. Almost felt like he had his eye on them more than Salesforce.
Well, at the top end of town, right? They're a serious contender. I think that's why.
Yeah, yeah.
It's weird. I just did a search for Pega and couldn't find anything on them. Hang on, here we go. Let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. Is that's coming up there? Yeah, here we go. Pega.
Yeah.
Yes, we trust you. Close. Yeah, so look at this. marketing, sales automation, customer service, co-browsing, field service, customer
Yeah,
decision making. Man, that's the full stack there, right?
everything but the productivity side, right?
Yeah.
So we've still got the productivity side to bring into play, and we've still got the infrastructure side. But it sounds like from a Dynamics 365 angle, they're clearly trying to check all the same
Yeah.
boxes.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see if it'd be interesting to look at like their website, maybe on one of those archive engines or Wayback Machines, just to see
Mm,
how they added these things, or if they've when I run across a company like that I'm not familiar with, I don't know if this is what they've always done and I'm just hearing about it,
yeah.
or the reason I'm hearing about it is because they've added these new things and suddenly they're competing.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, what they've done is gone after the top end of town, right? They've gone after the enterprise space, the where the big money is, and they've
Yeah,
established themselves really there. Now, whether they intend to push down into the mid market, I don't know. They're definitely nothing, as far as I know, and it's 2 years since I've looked at them. There's nothing at the low end of town, but definitely, as I say, I was coming across them in banking and utilities were the main companies that they were playing ball in, that I was
yeah.
coming across them in.
Well, it may be more than Microsoft getting into their turf, is why they popped up on the screen rather than them stepping into theirs. I mean, Dynamics is, let's face it, has historically been a small and mid market solution.
Yeah.
Um, some enterprises, but to listen to them, you'd think this has always been an enterprise solution, but it wasn't really. They've tried to make it an enterprise solution, or out there hard selling enterprise to get it in there, almost to the point of foregoing everything else there for a while. The SMB motion stopped completely. Um, they kind of dumped all that off on partners or even distributors, which is a complete cluster,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and focused completely on that enterprise customer. And I don't know if they feel like they've got the momentum they need there, and now they're turning back, because you heard in that podcast
Yeah.
Hayden talking about a new emphasis on
Yeah,
SMB.
it felt that nailed the top end of town, right? And now is going to be pivoting back and going after mid and SMB.
Yeah, which was their roots. I mean, they should be able to do well there.
Yeah.
And a lot of partners, like, we'd focused on that small and mid market customer for many years. So we definitely felt the ebb and flow of their interest and then their lack thereof
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, over the time.
Well, just to those people that are online, we've got a few people online. I see the. Give us an update on how you feel the audio level is. I've done some tinkering on my end, put a bit of a noise gate on to try and shut Steve down when from coming through my microphone. So hopefully that's removed the echo and we're a bit more on par. If you have any
Yeah,
questions,
I turned my speaker down a little bit also.
gotcha. If you have any questions, make sure you ask them. We've got the chat windows up on our screen. Audio is like royalty, according to Jonas. So thanks, Jonas, for that.
Excellent.
Pleased
Excellent.
to see you're online. Okay, another thing. Here, I'm going to put this up on screen and tell me what you think of this. Dynamics 365 Fast Track Recognized Solution Architects. My gosh, this is pretty amazing. The rigor they had to go through to actually get this badge, if you like, or to be able to put this on their CV.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty exclusive club. I think there's what, like 20 of them,
Well,
or is this all of them?
no, well, that's what this one here is what they put up on screen. I think they had about this many up on stage. I think you're right
Yeah,
that there's probably more, but I mean, some of the rigor, they have to have a minimum of 5 years experience, a minimum of 3 years as an architect. They had to do 2 projects that were monitored, multiple interviews, as well as other type of tests. So this is not, I'm just going to go ace a test type thing. They've actually
yeah,
got to
right.
have a heritage in the technology.
Yeah. Did you know any of these
No,
people?
none of them.
Yeah, yeah, me neither. So I was kind of curious where they. I wonder how a guy like the one in the top center with a company called the World Bank,
Yeah.
working for an organization. I mean, how would he have gotten through 5 deployments? Did you do 5 different deployments at the bank,
Well,
or?
he could be, onto this project just now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting and an easy thing for Microsoft to do, is kind of like the MVPs. They've singled out a group, but that's a pretty big group and growing. And to be able to create some more
Yeah.
recognition, kind of that same thing with the community. Really trying to give those pats on the back and encourage the folks that are the champions of what they're doing. Uh, and by the way, Jonas, if you're still listening, we're still waiting for an answer for Orlando.
Haha, Jonas, yeah, mate, are you coming and joining us, mate, in our Airbnb? Oh, you've got the last spot if you take it, otherwise we're going to have to sell it off. So let us know. Now, did you see Jonas has made a comment there about ALM? I don't know if you know some information on that. Can you take a look at that chat of his?
He's going to ask those developer type questions, and I'm not a developer type guy, so I see that ALM and I push it off to my development team, and I say, you guys worry about that. I don't pay too much attention to it. I know that he's recently been challenged with some stuff around ALM for marketing in particular, and that's not a great story. Um, Kind of like with portals, ALM is kind of challenging with portals, and I think marketing, because so much of what you're doing in marketing is data, right? When you're in a dev environment. Uh-oh. All right, what did he say? I can't read it.
Well, so like there's a little background bot running on this chat, and what its job is to do is make sure people don't use foul language. And it bumped Jonas and says, please refrain from using foul language. And then it says view deleted, like at least I can view it. So obviously the Gaylord thing is a foul language.
It doesn't like the gay lord. Funny.
Classic. Ah, there you go. You might get it. Oh no, it got deleted as well, Jonas. You've he
He's
just got a
been
one
banned by your
second
bot.
timeout. He got a timeout. I'm gonna turn I'm gonna have to turn that filter well down because we definitely want that humor. But anyhow, so Jonas has not been clear about whether he's definitely coming with us at this point. Um, Other things that I found. Oh, by the way, just back on the fast track. One of the things he said at the end, because they were recognizing Dynamics fast track. He said from next year it'll be Power Platform architects that are recognized.
Yeah, and there's not a fast track motion around Power Platform, right? I'm not familiar with a fast track, so I guess it'll just be another new set of dimensions that he's going to come up with, or that they're going to come up with around. And this has got to be coming out of marketing, I would think, right?
Yeah.
This is probably Alyssa's
Well,
group that's
well,
doing
the
it.
thing is, right, is that it's not necessarily Dynamics. Everything built on Dynamics is on the Power Platform. So what I think they're really showing is that the focus more and more is going to be on the Power Platform. Any architecture is always going to be touching it. And really, there's a big difference between that and implementing a first-party app, because if you've nailed the Power Platform piece, the first-party app's relatively straightforward. I say that with a caveat because, there's some complexity, of course, around field service and talent and various other apps out there than, the old school kind of just sales and customer service type app.
Yeah, I think we're getting to an inflection point on the Power Platform brand. When we first moved our stuff over to Power Platform, I continued to say that it was powered by Dynamics 365.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, even today, our Power Apps that don't have any first party capability or components at all still say Dynamics 365 up there. So the branding is already a little confusing.
Yeah.
But I, as an ISV, was a little concerned that if I went out talking about our application powered by the Power Platform, nobody would know what the hell I was talking about.
Yeah.
So we kind of hung on to that Powered by Dynamics 365 for a while, and it does say that up in the top of the app still. They are about to change that, but we already kind of dropped the Dynamics 365. It became dead for us.
Yeah.
And switched to. So I think now we're just saying powered by the Microsoft Cloud. So we're being still a little vague,
Mm-hmm.
but we do talk Power Platform in the marketing material. So we're getting comfortable that it's not as foreign a concept to people, and we may be just hopeful thinking.
Yeah. We'll see.
I think Power Platform is still pretty vague.
We'll see what happens. Oh, we've got an update there from Jonas. I see he is staying at an unmentionable hotel in Orlando, so he's not joining us in our Airbnb. Perhaps we'll have to auction that off here.
Yeah,
But he was talking about the problem with ALM, you see, in marketing is not the data, it's the inability or at least the hassle to have marketing solutions in the dev test prod environment. Now, I've not touched anything with marketing since the new version came out. I got burnt so badly on the marketing pilot days. I've not
yeah,
invested any time. So I have really got no experience in that space at all.
yeah. Well, I think marketing. They sell that there is a cost per instance, and I think that's the challenge is
Right.
that you could certainly have dev test. Probably you have all the instances you want, but you got to pay for each of those. So um, there's a challenge with that. I think that some people are struggling with, and it's interesting because I was actually talking to George Dubinsky last night about some of the ISV stuff that's coming and similar kind of challenges as we move from this idea that we had for so many years of sandboxes and production instances. And over on the PowerApps side, we really those two concepts are a little different, right? We have trials, which are temporary, or we have production instances. And now that we're moving to this new storage model, I can have as many production instances as I want, but there's no concept really of a sandbox per se. I don't look at a trial as a sandbox. That's just a temporary production instance. It's the same. They're all the same instances. So how does an ISV or a customer or a partner uh, do this ALM process when you really are dealing with multiple production instances? I guess the fact they're production doesn't mean they're used for production, but then when you get down to licensing or buying apps, because some of these apps out there are like, oh, you have to pay for production use, but dev and test is no, you don't have to pay for them. How will they recognize the differences? So we've got some interesting things coming up still around ISV, and that motion's moving quick. They're going to be launching, I think in July. They're certainly going to be talking about the SaaS free trials that will move right into paid, where Microsoft collects the funds on behalf of the ISV and sends you your share. And this whole idea of the metered billing, right? Because in a SaaS model, you got maybe a couple of different dimensions, a per user or maybe a per org. But there's lots of ISV solutions sold on lots of different metrics, like number of emails or number of contacts or different things like that. So that's another component they're bringing in. And all this, I don't know if they're just going to announce it at Inspire or which parts of it are actually going to launch at Inspire. We've got all the ISVs are now having to go recertify, right? They got to middle of October, I think, to get recertified.
Yeah, they got the 15th of October to get recertified, with the kickoff of it happening on the 14th of next month. So they got to, as of the 14th of the month, they need to start looking at their cloud partner portal and log into
Yeah.
Partner Center and kick off the migration of their profile to the Partner Center, because that's where everything's going to be done in the future. And then that's going to be all done and dusted by October the 15th, that I noted yesterday on the call that I have. And of course, part of that rhythm that they're going through is that they have to recertify and reclassify their product. And this applies to F&O third-party apps, as well as CE. And there's some minimum expectations, right? On the CE side, if your product's not 9x compatible,
Yep.
it's out.
Yeah. 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 Not just well, and part of that 9x compatibility is going to be determined with the solution checker,
Mm-hmm.
which came out a while ago, and they announced at Business Application Summit they added quite a few more dimensions to that. They had previously a solution checker, and then they had the actual app certification tool.
Mm-hmm.
Solution checker anybody could use on an unmanaged solution just to make sure it's seems okay. The app certification tool was much more robust, and that's what applications had to go through before they could get an app source. and but it threw a lot of false positives. Um, and so I spent some effort on that and moved a lot of that feature functionality over to Solution Checker. So Solution Checker is becoming a much more robust. I don't know if it's the only tool. I don't know if they're still going to use some other tool in the background, uh, getting into App Source or a Solution Checker. Hopefully, it'll become just a single tool that we can all count on.
So what I picked up yesterday on the call was that one, to get an app revalidated as well as submit a new app, once the system's running, you're going to have to go through a code review. They're going to have to do a functional review, which I assume around your business, what you're doing, that type of thing, kind of an ethical type check. Then there's going to be a deployment validation and a security validation checks done. And that's going to be the minimum of those four steps to actually get your product listed. And then ongoing, if you need to run anytime you patch or anything like that, you need to use a solution checker, app checker, flow checker, are the three different apps you'll have to run your solution through to once you kind of have gone through that initial phase and you're releasing various versions after that point.
Yeah, I guess that assumes, of course, that you're using Flow in your solution. If you're not,
Totally.
I guess you would need Flow Checker. And the part of that concerns me again is that functional review. Um, and I guess we'll see how that unpacks. I think that we mentioned last week that the outsourced team that they had, the offshore team that they had doing this was kind of going down I think taking that functional review and getting kind of deep in your business, which I didn't really feel like was any of their business.
Yeah.
If I build an application that technically meets the requirements, doesn't create any security breaches, complies with all the rules, installs on the application just fine,
Yeah.
it's really my business if its value is or its function doesn't have any value to the user.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with, particularly when you get into verticals, right, where they've got a very specific and unique need that a layperson would not grasp that requirement or necessity at all. Just doesn't make sense to a layperson. Only makes sense to someone who's in that vertical, and everybody in the vertical goes, oh yeah, that is an absolute critical requirement of our business. Yeah, I just don't want to have Microsoft telling me, their opinion of whether something is, a valid need or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll see where that one functional thing goes.
The other thing that kind of grabbed my attention was that they said you need to get your billing profile completed. And they emphasized it 2 or 3 times. Get your billing profile completed. Get your billing profile updated in this new portal. And then the other one was from a co-sell perspective, you have to make sure that you're providing co-sell ready materials. So in other words, materials to be able to get Microsoft staff, the sales field, etc. There's going to be, I assume, a list of artifacts that you need to provide so that they can sell your product on your behalf.
Yeah, so a couple interesting things happening there. Your co-sell offers are going to be flipped to what's called a draft status, right?
Yeah.
Well, part of the reason for that is I guess you need to decide if you're going to opt into the 20% program, right? So, there's a decision you need to make of whether you're going to opt into the 20% program for this app or that app. So that's why one of the reasons I think it's flipping to draft status. Another reason is probably a lot of people didn't flesh out those documents. When you think about the co-seller, the Microsoft seller who's going to go sell your app, first of all, he's not going to, go study your website and learn everything there is, watch all your demos. He's not going to he's not doing any of that stuff.
Yeah.
He's looking for, give me a one-page high-level document that tells me what your thing does. Concise. Give me a one-page customer story of how somebody used it. So it's these assets that they're looking for are like these little battle cards, these little quick. It's interesting because when we first put together some of those assets, I don't know what we were thinking. We clearly weren't thinking about it from a seller's standpoint. So we were all talking about, oh yes, the customer can do this, and the customer loves this, and all that. And when we had an opportunity to go back, kind of update all those assets, and because co-sellers weren't doing a whole lot with it, and I thought, we need to redo these assets for the standpoint of the co-seller.
Mm,
Here's what's in it for you. Our app will allow you to close more deals faster, activate dormant seats, completely different messaging to the co-seller than what might be the end
yeah.
customer. And but yeah, there's about half a dozen opportunities for some assets that you give them, and yeah, if you're going to stick in a 50-page white paper, forget it. Nobody's going to read it.
Yeah. Um, it's going to be interesting, as in, I know we've had conversations even just earlier on this week about ISVs thinking that they're just not going to engage in app source. Let's not even list up there. Let's forget about it. I mean, I think they're not aware that that's not going to be a choice.
You and I talked a few days ago about one of the pretty good sized ISVs, friend of mine for several years. A lot of people would know who it is. I'm not going to mention who it is, but was asking me some questions about it, and I just said, yeah, I mean, this is unavoidable. He says, well, we're just not going to go through AppSource, and letting him know that, well, no, if you engage at all, I mean, with this application, there's a 10% revenue share for engaging with the Microsoft ecosystem.
Yeah.
You know, regardless of how it's engaged with, whether it's through AppSource, whether you go side load it, it doesn't matter. And it was news to him. And this was a significant ISV.
Yeah.
You're talking about a 10% cost, which, you know, in the ISV space, that's not an insignificant amount of money to plan for. You got your reseller partners out there that you're paying a piece. You've got your own sales staff that you're paying some money, and another 10% kind of coming off the top. That's significant. And I guess I'm a little surprised that, as significant as it is, a lot of people just seem to be under the assumption that it's avoidable.
Yeah. That there's an opt-out. And now this is, what's interesting is that if you look at Salesforce have the same deal. You have to pay them a co-sell fee. You have I think it's 15% is their default level, going up to 25 and even higher. So it's kind of like, it's not that Microsoft has come up with this idea that's all of a sudden, how dare they kind of thing. This is industry standard stuff. If you put an app up in the iTunes store or iOS store, Apple take a cut. I mean, this is business. They're providing the platform, the validation, all this kind of overhead, and providing you a marketplace, which, looking at the notes I see, are going to become a full commercial platform, so transact enabled. I think that it's a no-brainer that they want to have a little slice of the action.
Not new, just new to us.
Yeah.
I mean,
Not exactly.
you're right. And when you look at when they first launched AppSource, and they were looking at the success that Salesforce was having with AppExchange. Without AppExchange, Salesforce is not nearly as successful a company. I mean, AppExchange was a huge grease to that machine and really blew up Salesforce. And that was, I think, the big push behind AppSource was, we need to be able to compete with AppExchange. And they put together this marketplace that frankly didn't do very much. And I think the big difference was that AppExchange, Salesforce always got a piece of that revenue. That was a day one deal. I mean, they've always gotten a piece of that revenue, and I think that revenue is what motivated Salesforce to make sure that AppExchange succeeded, that they drove traffic to AppExchange, that they promoted those ISVs. And when Microsoft launched AppSource without any revenue share model, it was almost like it was an experiment at one level.
Yeah.
But it was also like a favor they were doing for ISVs. We'll do you guys a favor and give you another path to market. But if I'm doing you a favor, I don't really have an obligation to see to it that you get value from that favor. So the rev share kind of puts it gets it where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I think that partners that have had ISV solutions in both camps aren't really,
Yeah.
yeah, they've had a free ride with Microsoft, but a lot of those ISVs just had a free ride. Yep.
That was the app, but there's the whole document on it, right, which goes into a fair amount of detail, which is, Microsoft have not had this in place, but you know, there's a cost. And I got a comment on one of the posts I had on LinkedIn when I did a post on the Power Platform and building on it as an ISV, and someone said, where's the big $1 billion ISV out there that's on the Power Platform like Salesforce have now? Salesforce have these folks that are $1 billion. I saw another one, $800 million business, and they're all being done through App Exchange. That means the ISV's making a fair chunk of change, right?
Oh yeah.
And why wouldn't they take a little little gob at the action?
Yeah, and I think the Microsoft ISV, you can tell them that, hey, everybody else does it. Microsoft is only kind of getting up to where everybody else is. But the fact is, they've been doing business now for what, a decade on this platform. They've built a cost model. They've got their revenue streams, and then there has never been a cost for being an ISV. So the fact that there was a cost to be an ISV elsewhere, the fact that Microsoft is just kind of leveling up the playing field still doesn't sit well with an ISV who's never had to worry about that cost.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just hitting them as whatever justification or rationalization you have, it's hitting 10% off my top line. Boom, right there.
Yeah.
So that's the struggle. And I think that there's a low level of confidence that Microsoft is going to justify that revenue share. And I think that's the one on Microsoft is really, I don't think any ISV would complain about giving up 10% if it doubled my business.
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to double business, but clearly I'll give up 10% to double my business. Okay, well, how much more business do you need to make to offset that 10%? And is Microsoft going to at least generate or make sure through their avenues that happens?
Yeah.
And hopefully a lot more.
Exactly. So one of the listeners to the show actually sent in something they wanted us to discuss, but they actually asked that we didn't name them on air, so we won't do that. We'll just go to this post here though on Docs, which is creating a common data service database. And if you read through this and come to this section here, it says by choosing to create an instance, you agree Microsoft can use entity and field names that you create, but not the content in the database table to help improve our common data model. These names may be stored in our diagnostic systems and copied across regions. And this chap was, he says to me, what ISVs think about that their data model is basically submitted and, they're agreeing to on hitting create database there, that gets handed off to Microsoft.
I think could potentially be another example of Microsoft not wording things well. We had this with Common Data Service. Remember people saying, "Oh, you can't create an opportunity entity," and it was just a bad interpretation of what they were reading. And Microsoft came back and actually, instead of trying to fix the sentence, they just removed the whole thing entirely from the licensing guide. And I think this may be another one of those examples, because when you think about your custom entity as potentially being IP of yours, but you're putting it on Microsoft's platform, you're putting it on their common data service for yourself or your customer. It's getting pulled into analytics. It's getting pulled into other regions for you to serve that application. One way to read this is Microsoft's just saying, hey, you understand we're going to be doing this with your IP on your behalf.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's going to be going into our analytics engine on your behalf. It's going to be going into other regions. The paranoid person or the conspiracy person might be more thinking, oh, wait a minute, this Microsoft's taking ownership of my custom entity called a what's not.
Yeah.
And now it's going to show up in the common data model as a what's not. And it was I don't think that's what it means. But certainly the language is vague enough that you can interpret it either way.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I saw that fire up here a couple of weeks ago, and my first thought was, it's a cynical way of looking at the sentence.
Yeah.
Uh, could be correct, but I looked at it differently and didn't see it the same way.
Yeah, Microsoft's butt is definitely covered by having it in there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Here's another thing, the Review 2019 Release Wave 2 plan is now it's called, and there's two different documents here, one for Dynamics 365 and one for the Power Platform that Microsoft released in Atlanta. So this is our next wave coming around, and I just thought, is there anything that kind of jumps out at you that has grabbed your attention in that mix that's there?
I think the thing that jumps out, it really is the title. This is now called a wave.
Yep.
Um, and I was actually listening to Nick and Colin's podcast the other day on they do that refresh the cache about portal stuff, because I'm looking at portal stuff, so I'm looking around at some of that, and then they had also mentioned that that change to wave, that a wave is a little more vague, right? It's a wave of features that are coming. It's not a set point in
Yeah.
time that boom, on this day everything lights up. So I think they're probably getting tired of people saying, "Hey, where's those features I was supposed to have in April on April
Yeah.
1st?" And here it is, March or May already. I don't have them. So I think the wave terminology is giving them a little latitude,
Mm-mm. It's
so that people aren't feel like they're late all the time.
So one of the slippages, if you like, that happened from the last wave was everyone was looking forward to when you're closing a case, you weren't tied into that old dialogue box that's been around for eternity. Now, my understanding is that's not happened. There's been some slippage on that, and it's not available for you to create custom or switch that off at the moment.
I think if you look at a wave beginning on April 1st, and then another wave beginning on what, October 1st,
Yeah, around then.
that then that first wave doesn't really end until October 1st, or maybe September 31st is the end of of that wave,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to use a wave terminology, it's almost like the wave is 6 months long.
hang, hang on. A wave also kind of draws out at one point. So they're like, oh, no, all
That's
those features, oh, let's drag them back out.
so maybe that dialogue got caught in the undertow.
Yeah, yeah. So interesting. I'm actually going to share my screen and bring up a couple of other features that we can discuss. Let's just go there. So okay, I can get rid of that one, the common data. Now let's just go back to this one, business process flow immersive experience. Notice that they've brought it down to a horizontal type of experience now over in the right side of things, and then I like down the bottom here. Additionally, we're deprecating task flows. So
Yeah, I don't know that many people are using those.
well, this totally supersedes them in a way, right? And
Yeah.
it's quite a nice looking experience. It'll be interesting. They say it's dockable. It'll be interesting to see if they allow you as in for this component to be put anywhere you want. Could it be on the bottom of the screen, the left hand side, the header, or the right? Like, will we ultimately get that flexibility? Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, we've had this for a while. It was one of the early things that came out with the new unified interface, was the ability to pop the process over docked on the side
Yeah,
instead of across the top. And it made sense for longer processes. Plus, it was a way to kind of see the steps unravel. The only way to do it in the horizontal format, was to click that little
ugly.
button to open it. Yeah, and it opened it over your
Yeah,
form, and then it closed as soon as you moved off of it. So um, it's interesting, between the navigation now being open by default on the left side, the potential for a process sitting there docked on the right side. You're starting to deal with screen real
yeah,
estate, which I think has been a challenge for complex forms that have got timelines on them and all sorts of other, a 3-column form which has been their default. And I think they struggle a little bit with screen real estate,
mm,
and it's a tough one to figure out. You've got this much area to work with, and where the hell do you put some of this stuff where it's you know as usable as it can be.
Yeah. So another nice one there is, of course, the PowerApps portals. You know,
Yeah.
July public preview, general availability October 2019. No early access though for this, but definitely a type of maker experience. It's looking quite attractive, I feel.
Yeah, and they've got this new uh, front end uh, editing experience also, right? If you're where you're logged into the portal as administrative user or customizer, whatever the role may
Yep.
be, and you've got some. I mean, you've had some abilities to a little dialogue will pop up to do some things, but now you're getting a little bit more of a front end. Kind of reminds me of some of the WordPress visual builder type solutions that are out there, where you do a lot of the work right on the front end.
Mm-mm-mm.
Uh, and it looks pretty cool. Unfortunately, every button you push says something like a cool new feature coming soon. So
But
they've got the bones of it. They got the frame of a front end builder. They just don't have any of the functionality yet.
so talking about coming soon, here's another one. One admin center to rule them all, and man, I can't wait for this because at the moment it seems we've got to know 6 to 8 different URLs to do anything, to hop around the system. And so they've obviously heard the feedback and they're intending on releasing a one admin center.
Heard the feedback. I mean, how could they not know? I mean, this is just another example, I think, of them taking that 2 steps forward and 1 step back that they tend to do on lots of things. And yeah, I mean, it almost seemed like admin centers were a new feature everybody wanted a bunch of,
Yeah.
somehow, because they just launched so many of them. I know there's stuff going on, I'm sure, behind the scenes of migrating and merging and not leaving people behind and stuff like that. And there's a lot of stuff to do there, but uh, we're not going to have one admin center to rule them all. There's going to be fewer. We still got partner center. We got stuff going on over there. There's still going to be, you still got your Office 365 admin center. So we're not getting to this golden place. But yeah, for Power Apps, we don't need three.
Oh, there's
Uh,
more than 3 at the moment.
yeah,
Way more than 3. Well, sorry. If you're taking Flow, Power BI, Power Apps, there's 3 straight away. Then you've got the maker
yeah,
experience. You've got the admin center. You've got the Dynamics 365, the old launch, of your
yeah,
instance.
real important.
You know, there's a heck of a lot. And I mean, I felt the pain of it, I suppose, when I did all the training materials for Microsoft, is that you're constantly bouncing between multiple URLs at any time, to try and do something. The next one here
Yeah,
is the
and
intelligence.
some of
What was
that.
that?
I was going to say some of that, was when you think about how they're now combining some technologies that were originally built independently,
Yeah.
right? Like the Canvas and the model, those were kind of Canvas came up out of the whole SharePoint side. I think there wasn't even a contemplation that it was going to be a CDS or model driven. It was something else over there with its own infrastructure, its own thought process, and then now we got the model, and now those kind of merging together in the same place. So it makes sense that there was more than one. I think the same thing with Flow. I mean, Flow came out before there was a
Totally.
contemplation that that's going to replace Dynamics workflows. So these things are already kind of down their path
Yeah.
of some other direction for some other purpose. And so it doesn't surprise me that we ended up with so many admin centers, but and pulling all that stuff together, you got to figure the wiring under the hood is pretty significant to get that to happen.
Mm-mm. So here's one I found very interesting. Simplified lead management experience. And if you read through it, we used to have this in the old days. So you can turn on in the admin settings, say that you want to decide whether you create or when qualifying a lead, an account, a contact, or an opportunity. Well, this is like Back to the Future right here.
Yeah, one of the workflow guys, I don't know if it was Demi, maybe Andrew, or somebody had actually built a workflow extension that did exactly
That's
that. That
right. You're right.
you could switch out the qualify to okay, I don't want to create an opportunity every time I qualify a lead because there's no opportunity in my business, or that's not what I mean by qualify. So it is nice of them to give us that feature back out of the box. I don't know if I'd call it simplified, just maybe more logical. You know?
Classic, classic. Now, join the Power Platform World Tour at locations near you. So this tour, are you going to get involved in this in any format? I don't really know much about it.
I don't know much about it either. Who's
I have
doing
no
this?
idea, but they popped this up at the end of the keynote session. What I find interesting is the Power Platform hashtag down there with WT. Hashtags
Yeah,
don't work when there's a gap in them.
yeah.
So a bit of a mistake there. But I see it's coming to London in August, so I shall head along. But just noticing, it's obviously only Northern Hemisphere the focus here, because there's nothing below the equator in this mix. Oh, maybe Mexico. Is that on the equator or below it? I'm not sure.
I think it's below it. But is this a Microsoft thing?
Well, Microsoft put it up. James Phillips put it up at the end of his closing keynote.
Yeah, but they've put up stuff about D365 Saturdays before also,
Yeah,
which isn't there. So
that's valid. That's
I don't
valid.
know. I tell you, it's funny because they do kind of struggle with social. Um, the hashtag thing doesn't surprise me. They put us in a little pilot, or like a handful of us ISVs and AppSource put us in a little pilot that was originally going to be an email campaign that Microsoft was going to produce and run uh, for each of us. I think there were four of us ISVs out to promote our solutions. The purpose of the pilot was to see if Microsoft, through their abilities, was able to drive traffic to AppSource. And it evolved from an email campaign. Somebody said, email's kind of so 80s, it should be a social campaign. So then it flipped over to a social campaign. This thing took way too long to even get done. But they finally launched it like a month ago or something like that. And they sent out some tweets for each of us, and they sent out some LinkedIn updates. Didn't hashtag anything. I didn't put anything in there. They went out through the like at Microsoft Dynamics uh, uh, handle, but didn't hashtag anything. I had to go back in and re-share them and stick some hashtags to get any traffic. And the whole goal was to see if they could generate.
Yeah.
The ultimate link was to, for example, in our case, to the test drive on AppSource. The other ISVs was to their test drive, applications to see if just figuring out where, because one of the things I think Microsoft's had trouble with AppSource, and now that they're going to be collecting this money, they're going to have to figure out is getting traffic to
Yeah.
AppSource.
Yeah.
Most of the traffic coming into AppSource for Dynamics is coming or was coming from home.dynamics, which is where you land after you're a customer.
Yep. No, they're going to have to run a proper marketing campaign, a proper digital asset across all social medias. Like I'm talking AdWords, ad campaigns, and it's going to have to be done over a long period of time. They're going to have to get really smart around retargeting and pulling people, just like Amazon do, back in around specific apps, right? Retargeting per app, not per the platform, but per app, as part of the smarts I think they're going to have to do. Listen, we're 2 minutes to go before we finish. I just thought I'd shout out one of the things that we're doing at the summit in Orlando. You're looking at the two people here. Oh, sorry, that way, that guy there. We're going to do a pub quiz, and I've got a blog post coming out very shortly. And it's basically you got to set up teams, get involved. There's going to be a massive amount of swag. We've come up with swag in the bag, and that is a hashtag, swag in the bag. But yeah, we're open to a couple of things. One, if you want to get involved in helping organize it. Two, there's a link that's going to be provided to add questions. If you want to think you can stump the audience with some amazing questions, you need to provide evidence, of course, for that. And then the other one is that if you want to provide swag, there's a form there to get in touch with us to provide swag. They're all just Microsoft forms just to collect the stuff into a table so that we can collate it together. But we're hoping it's going to be a lot of fun, of course. Steve is shouting all the beer that is going to be given out as spot prizes. So, yeah, we just hope it's going to be a good time, if you like, at the event.
Yeah, I think in the U.S. we'd probably call a pub quiz team trivia.
Okay, team trivia.
Right? I think it's so kind of like trivia. So for folks over here that might not know what a pub quiz
Okay.
is, I think that's what we would call it over here. So it could be fun. It could be a little break from crunching your brain of learning stuff. I think the biggest prize, of course, is the bragging rights.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'll be as interested to see which people are too afraid to show up,
Yeah.
uh, to expose maybe that they don't know what people think they
That's
know,
it.
versus some of the folks that we're gonna have some dark horses that are gonna come out and know all these answers that we weren't familiar with
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
So
And this thing, right? Teams of four. So you get your team together, get your mascot sorted out, get your brand sorted out, your color, your slogan, that type of thing. And yeah, there's going to be a full trophy. The trophy is going to be, one that'll be bought back year after year. And this is the inaugural year, so bragging rights are going to be pretty up there. Dynamics community folks that I've talked to are quite excited about it, adding another dimension to the event. So let's see whether maybe somebody in the Nordics are going to put a team together that are going to smash everyone, or is it going to be country bragging rights? Is it going to be a US
yeah,
led thing, or Canadians might be there in force?
them damn
Yeah,
Canadians. You never know about those guys.
dark horses, right?
Dark horses,
Well,
exactly.
before we finish off, Steve, is there anything you want to add?
No, next week I'll be doing this live from Key West, Florida. So my wife and I are going down there for the July 4th Independence Day vacation. We're going to take a week down
Nice.
there. And so I don't have any idea what my background will be. Maybe palm trees and pina coladas.
Fine.
But, so that'll be next week. And then back here again the week after.
Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds good.